You ever wake up one morning and realize someone is trying to steal everything you've worked for? That's exactly what happened to me. I was just a retired firefighter, looking for a little peace and quiet, tending to my orchard. My dream? To make the best cider this town had ever tasted. But then the HOA came knocking. At first, it was just a few wooden stakes in the ground. A couple of surveyors poking around where they didn't belong. They told me it was just an improvement project, a road that would be good for the community. They lied, because what they really wanted was my land. And when I said no, they didn't take it lightly. I woke up one morning to find my orchard slashed apart, my irrigation system destroyed, and sitting right at my property line, a bulldozer, engine running. That's when I knew. This wasn't just a fight over land. This was war. And if they thought I was going down without a fight, they were dead wrong. Beat. Because there was one tiny legal detail they never saw coming, and it was about to ruin them. They say retirement is when you finally get to live your dream. I thought that's what I was doing when I bought 10 acres in Pine Hollow Estates, a quiet, peaceful community just outside the city. For 30 years, I'd run headfirst into burning buildings, serving as a firefighter, pulling people from the worst moments of their lives. And when I finally took off that uniform, I knew what I wanted. A simple life, one filled with purpose. I found that purpose in apple trees. Slight chuckle. My father had been a cider maker back in the day, and I always dreamed of following in his footsteps. So, I took every penny of my pension and bought land. Land that was perfect for growing apples. Rolling green hills, fertile soil, and even a natural spring at the edge of my property. For a year, I worked those fields. I planted over 200 trees, each one a promise to myself. In just a few years, this land would bear the best cider anyone had ever tasted. But what I didn't know was that someone else had their own plans for my land, and they were willing to destroy everything I built to get what they wanted. It all started with a single wooden stake that at first, I thought it was nothing. Just a piece of wood with a red ribbon tied around it, sticking out of the ground near my fence. Maybe some utility work, maybe a surveyor's mistake. But as the days passed, more appeared. Curious, I went to Geraldine Price, the HOA president. Now, if you've ever dealt with an HOA, you know there are two kinds of leaders. Some genuinely care about the community. And then, there are the ones who treat their little board meetings like a corporate empire. Geraldine? She was the latter. She met me with that fake smile, the kind a politician gives when they already know the answer to your question. "Oh, Henry," she gushed, placing a manicured hand on my arm. I was just about to reach out. "We're planning a little improvement project, an emergency access road for the community." Beat a road, right through my orchard. I told her no. There had to be another way. But her expression darkened. "Now, Henry, I know this is difficult to hear, but this is for the good of the community. Surely, you wouldn't want to stand in the way of progress." I stood firm. "That land is mine. You can't build a road through it without my consent." Cold pause. She just smiled and said, "We'll see about that." That night, someone slipped an envelope under my door. There was no return address, no signature, just a single sheet of paper. "Check your deed. They're lying. Fight before it's too late." Beat. I stared at those words for a long time. The paper felt rough in my hands, like it had been folded and unfolded 100 times. Who sent this? And why? But something deep in my gut told me. Whoever it was, they were trying to help me. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I drove to the county clerk's office, hoping to get some answers. That's when I realized just how deep this went that I sat across from the county clerk, a man named Dale Whitmore. He was in his 60s, one of those old school guys who still used a typewriter and never rushed a single thing in his life. When I gave him my lot number, he frowned. "Huh, that's strange." "Strange? Strange how?" Dale flipped through the property file, his bushy eyebrows drawing together. "Your survey's missing." "Missing?" I repeated, my stomach turning. He nodded. "Also, your zoning classification was changed a few months ago. Looks like it's been redesignated for community infrastructure use." Beat. I felt my hands tighten on the counter. My land, my private land, had been reclassified without my knowledge. And worse, the original deed was gone. I don't like this, Dale muttered, running a hand through his thinning hair. Something isn't right. You got enemies, Mr. Lawson. I thought about Geraldine's smug smile. I do now. On my way home, I stopped by my closest neighbor's house, Marla Jensen, a woman in her 70s, sharp as a tack despite the silver in her hair. She opened the door before I even knocked. I was wondering when you'd come by, she said. I blinked. You know something? She nodded and motioned me inside. The moment I stepped into her living room, she locked the door behind me. Then she whispered, Geraldine and her people have been planning this for months. I felt a chill creep up my spine. They had a meeting at the clubhouse a few weeks ago, she said, lowering her voice. They didn't know I was there, but I heard everything. They already sold the land behind your orchard, the land they don't even own yet, to a developer. My pulse pounded in my ears. They said the road is just a front. They're building something bigger. A commercial lot. A shopping plaza. Beat. I sat back, the weight of her words pressing down on me. This wasn't about an emergency access road. This was about money. And they were willing to lie, cheat, and steal to get what they wanted. But they weren't prepared for one thing. Me. Some battles come at you slowly, like a storm creeping in over the horizon. Others, they strike like lightning. I woke up early that morning, as I always did, ready to tend to my orchard. But the moment I stepped outside, beat, I felt my stomach drop. Bright red spray paint slashed across my orchard in jagged lines, cutting through my land like open wounds. Survey markers were everywhere. Wooden stakes hammered into the ground, mapping out a path I never approved. And sitting at my fence line, rumbling like a caged beast, was a bulldozer. For a moment, I just stood there, too stunned to move. Then I saw him. A man in a bright orange vest, one of Geraldine's hired workers, checking blueprints like he was planning a demolition. I stormed toward him, heart pounding. Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing? The man barely glanced up. Preliminary site prep. HOA orders. I could feel the heat rising in my face. This is my land. You have no right to be here. Now he looked at me, and for the first time, I saw it. The flicker of doubt in his eyes. He wasn't just doing his job. He was waiting for a fight. Then, as if on cue, a sleek black SUV pulled up, dust swirling as it skidded to a stop. Geraldine stepped out, smiling like a queen surveying her kingdom. Henry, she purred, walking toward me in ridiculously expensive heels for someone about to oversee a construction project. I see you've met our team. You really should have attended the HOA meeting. I clenched my jaw. I don't recall approving a damn thing. Her smile didn't falter. You didn't have to. We voted for you. And just like that, the storm hit full force that I wasn't stupid. I knew that HOA boards pushed boundaries all the time. But this was bigger than a road. That evening, I called Alex Carter, the journalist who covered real estate corruption. If anyone could help me figure out what the hell was going on, it was him. Geraldine Price? Alex muttered over the phone. Now that's a name I haven't heard in a while. You know her. A dry chuckle. Everyone in development circles does. She used to run a real estate empire until her company got busted for fraudulent land sales. Lost everything in court. I gripped the phone tighter, and now she's running my HOA. Let me do some digging, Alex said. Something tells me this isn't just about an access road. It didn't take long. By the next day, Alex called me back. Henry, you're going to want to sit down for this. Beat. He sent me a set of documents. And right there, in black and white, Geraldine had already sold the land behind my orchard to an investor who was planning a luxury shopping plaza. Beat. That road. It was never about the community. It was about making millions that I had to hear it for myself. So that night, I did something I never thought I'd do. I snuck into an HOA meeting. They held it at the clubhouse. Doors locked, members only. But thanks to Marla, I knew about the back hallway, where an old ventilation grate gave me a clear line of sound. I crouched down, ear pressed to the cold metal, and listened. Geraldine's voice rang clear as a bell. This is our only obstacle, she said, tapping something. I imagined it was a map of my land. A man with a thick southern drawl spoke next, one of her board members. He won't sell. Oh, he will, Geraldine assured them. Everyone has a breaking point. Silence. Then another voice. What if he doesn't? Cold pause. Geraldine sighed. Then we'll find a way to make him. A slow, sinking feeling spread through me. This wasn't just a land dispute. This was organized theft. And I was their next victim. The next morning, I found an envelope taped to my door. Notice of HOA violation, code 184B. Beat. I frowned. That didn't make sense. I followed every HOA rule. No overgrown grass. No unapproved structures. Nothing out of line. But when I read the letter, my stomach dropped. It claimed my orchard was in violation of HOA bylaws, and that I had 30 days to vacate the property, or they'd take legal action. Beat. I drove straight to Walter Jennings, the retired judge who'd become my ally. He read the notice, then leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. Henry, this code doesn't exist. I blinked. What? He flipped open an old, dusty HOA rulebook and ran his finger down the index. 184B isn't real. They made it up. A slow, cold rage spread through me. They would try and scare me, try and push me over the edge, so I'd fold. I exhaled, steadying myself. Well, they picked the wrong damn man to intimidate. Walter smiled. Now that's the spirit. I wasn't alone anymore. Walter and I spent hours researching legal options, but it felt like we were always one step behind. Then, out of nowhere, my phone rang. Blocked number. I hesitated, then answered. This is Henry. A woman's voice. Nervous. Mr. Lawson, I don't have much time, but you need to know, you're right. Geraldine's hiding things. And if you check the oldest HOA bylaws, you'll find a way to stop them. My heart pounded. Who is this? A pause. Then, barely above a whisper. Someone who made a mistake. Click. I stared at my phone, pulse racing. Whoever she was on the inside. And she'd just given me the one thing I needed most. Hoped. There's a certain kind of exhaustion that sets in when you realize you're fighting an enemy with no moral limits. And I learned that firsthand when they came for my orchard. It was just past midnight when I woke up to a sound that sent ice through my veins. The crack of splintering wood. I jumped out of bed and grabbed my flashlight, racing toward the trees. The moment my beam hit the orchard, my heart nearly stopped. My trees. Beat. They'd been destroyed. Rows of apple trees, hacked apart, branches hanging like broken limbs. The irrigation pipes, slashed wide open, spilling water across the dirt. I staggered forward, chest tight, as the realization sank in. This wasn't vandalism. This was a warning. I spun around, scanning the darkness. A black SUV sat at the end of my driveway. The engine revved once, then peeled away into the night. I knew who sent them, and I knew exactly what they wanted me to do. But if they thought I'd break, they were dead wrong. The next morning, I surveyed the damage with Walter Jennings. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched behind his back like he was holding himself together with sheer willpower. This isn't just intimidation, he muttered. This is them telling you to back down, or else. I exhaled slowly, hands trembling as I reached out and touched one of the damaged trees. Years of growth gone. I wasn't sure how much more I could take. That afternoon, I went into town to file a police report. Not that I expected much. The sheriff's office was too cozy with the HOA. But as I was leaving the station, someone grabbed my arm. A woman, early 50s. Her face was pale, her eyes darting around like she was afraid someone might see her talking to me. You're Henry Lawson, right? She whispered. I hesitated. Yeah, who are you? She didn't answer. Instead, she shoved a folded piece of paper into my hand. Check the oldest HOA bylaws, she murmured. There's something there, something they never deleted. And just like that, she was gone. I unfolded the paper. There were 3 words scrawled across the page in shaky handwriting. Agricultural Exemption Clause. I didn't know what it meant yet, but I had a feeling it was about to change everything. That night, Walter and I sat in his office, surrounded by boxes of old HOA documents. We'd been at it for 3 hours, digging through decades of amendments, rule changes, and legal loopholes. I was starting to think the woman at the police station had sent me on a wild goose chase, until Walter suddenly let out a low whistle. "Henry," he murmured, tapping an old, yellowed page. "You might want to take a look at this." I leaned in, reading the faded text carefully. It was an old HOA bylaw, one that hadn't been updated in nearly 40 years. No roads, developments, or infrastructure projects may be constructed on agricultural zoned land unless the property owner consents and a majority vote is secured. I blinked, then read it again, and suddenly the pieces clicked together. That's why they changed my zoning status behind my back. That's why Geraldine's people had deleted key pages from my file. Because if my land was still agricultural, they could never build that road. Beat. A slow, shaky grin spread across my face. We got him. The next morning, I showed up to the HOA meeting, uninvited. The second I stepped into that room, all conversation stopped. Geraldine sat at the front, dressed in one of her power suits, her smug little smirk firmly in place. "Henry," she said smoothly. "What a surprise." I dropped a thick stack of documents onto the table in front of her. "I'm here to discuss the agricultural exemption clause." The moment I said it, I saw it. The flicker of fear in her eyes. She recovered fast, but it was too late. I knew the truth now. I took a step forward. "You changed my zoning status illegally. You tried to erase this clause from the records. But guess what? You missed a copy." The board members exchanged nervous glances. I pressed on. "Without my consent and a majority vote, this road is dead in the water." Geraldine laughed, but it was forced. Henry, this is just an outdated rule. It doesn't apply anymore." Walter stepped beside me. "Actually, it does. And if you move forward with this project, you're looking at fraud charges." The room went silent. Then, from the back of the room, a new voice spoke up. "That's not all she's guilty of." Beat. I turned, and there stood Alex Carter, the journalist, and he was holding something that was about to bury Geraldine for good. Alex walked forward, his expression sharp and unreadable. "In my investigation, I found something even worse than the illegal zoning change," he said. "Turns out, the land behind Henry's orchard, the one you already sold to developers, it sits on federally protected watershed land." The room erupted in murmurs. I felt my breath catch. Watershed land? Alex nodded. "If that road gets built, it won't just be illegal. It'll be a federal crime." Geraldine's face lost all color. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The HOA board members? They turned on her instantly. "I had no idea," one of them blurted. "This is serious," another muttered. Then the new voice rang through the room. "You can discuss all of that with the Environmental Protection Agency." Beat. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway was a man in a government suit, a badge clipped to his belt. And just like that, the game was over. I'd seen a lot in my lifetime. Fires that raged for days. People pushed to their limits. But I had never, not once, watched someone's entire empire crumble right before my eyes. Until that day. Geraldine Price sat frozen in her chair, her once polished composure slipping away with every word from the EPA investigator. "This land sits on federally protected watershed territory," the man repeated, flipping through his official-looking paperwork. "Building a road here, let alone selling it for development, is a crime punishable by law." A murmur rippled through the room. The HOA board, once proudly backing Geraldine, now looked like scared children caught stealing from the cookie jar. One of them, a man named Richard Calloway, stood abruptly. I wasn't aware of any of this," he stammered. "I move that we immediately suspend all construction plans." "I second that," another voice chimed in. Just like that, the people who had spent months trying to bulldoze my land were jumping ship. But it wasn't over yet, because Geraldine wasn't going down without a fight. She shot to her feet, slamming a perfectly manicured hand onto the table. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "We have permits. We have legal authority." The EPA investigator didn't even blink. "Actually, you don't," he replied coolly. and we have reason to believe documents were tampered with to push this project forward. That was the final blow. Geraldine's face drained of color, and as the board members whispered among themselves, I knew her reign was officially over. The thing about corrupt people is that they'll always turn on each other the moment things go south. And that's exactly what happened next. As the meeting descended into chaos, the HOA treasurer, Frank Delaney, stood up slowly. His hands were shaking as he pulled a thick manila folder from his briefcase. I can't do this anymore, he muttered, voice barely above a whisper. He placed the folder on the table and slid it toward the investigator. These are the financial records, he continued. Bank transfers, contracts, payments. They'll show you everything. The entire room went silent. Even Geraldine. I saw the exact moment she realized what was happening. She lunged for the folder, but the investigator got to it first. Frank let out a shaky breath, then looked directly at me. I didn't know the full extent of what she was doing, he admitted. But I knew enough, and I should have spoken up sooner. Geraldine's voice shook with fury. You spineless. The investigator held up a hand. Mrs. Price, I suggest you remain silent from this point forward. For the first time in her life, she listened, and for the first time in a long time, I finally felt like I could breathe that IT was over. The road project was dead. The HOA was under investigation. And Geraldine Price? She was escorted out of that meeting in handcuffs. But as I stood there, watching the chaos unfold, a different kind of weight settled on my shoulders. Because while I may have won the war, my orchard had still suffered. More than 30 trees were damaged beyond repair. The irrigation system had been gutted. Years of work gone. And for what? Because some greedy people wanted a shopping plaza? I clenched my fists, my throat tightening. I wouldn't let them win. I wouldn't let their destruction be the final chapter in my story. So I did what I always did. I picked up my tools. And I got back to work. IT wasn't easy. Rebuilding never is. But something incredible happened in the weeks that followed. The entire town came together to help. Neighbors I had never spoken to before showed up with shovels and watering cans. Local businesses donated supplies. Even Walter, the old judge who never smiled, rolled up his sleeves and helped me plant new saplings. And slowly, inch by inch, the orchard came back to life. One afternoon, as I was securing a young tree in place, Marla approached me with a letter in her hand. The county sent this, she said, handing it over. I opened it. My breath hitched. It was an official statement, one that permanently declared my land as agricultural property, which meant one thing. No HOA could ever touch it again. I looked up at Marla, feeling a lump form in my throat. We did it, I murmured. She smiled softly. Yes, Henry, you did. 1 year later, the orchard was thriving again. The trees stood tall and strong, their leaves rustling in the breeze. And in my hands, a bottle of cider. My first full batch since the fight. I stood at the center of the town festival, surrounded by the very people who had stood beside me. Walter raised his glass. I think we all know what we should toast to. Marla nodded. To Henry's orchard. No, I corrected, smiling. To standing your ground. We all lifted our glasses, and as I took that first sip, tasting the fruits of my labor, I knew this was the sweetest victory of all.